Joining us now is the president of the New Zealand Police Association, Chris Cahill. Chris, do you remember that?
You're not going to catch me out that. No, I was in school.
Oh, but you don't.
That might be a slight exaggeration. I was at some form of school, shall we say?
But you don't have that recollection of Chris Muldoon saying to take the bike off the bikies.
No, I don't. I remember him being pretty. Him and the Black Pair having some sort of friendly relationship. I know they certainly represented at his funeral with the big haka. But yeah, but you're right. I mean, politics has been drumming the law and order issue most elections since I can remember.
Yes, well, it has, and particularly this one, obviously, but probably for good reason. Chris, I asked you on the show because yesterday, it was about this time yesterday, perhaps a little before, Commissioner Costa announced the change to the police pursuits policy. 2.5 years ago it changed in December 2020, but that's turned out to be, well, it would seem, if you read between the lines, a spectacular failure. What was your take on it?
Well, it probably depends on your perspective. I mean, you can't get past the 106% increase in people failing to stop for police. And, the visual side of that is the ram raids and the young kids and stolen cars. And that's what the public is seeing. It's what our members seen and had to experience on a nightly basis. And letting them just drive off was incredibly frustrating. On the flip side, and certainly a big side, is the number of deaths that have resulted and serious injuries from fleeing driver incidents has nearly completely gone, to be honest, and there's been very few, if any. And that's a real positive side. So it really depends on which side of the coin you're looking at.
Yes, I've seen comment, for example, of a father whose daughter died as a result of a police chase some 10 years ago. Coming out this morning and criticising the policy and saying that this will lead to more deaths. That, I have to say, seems to be, and I wonder if that's your perspective as well, a casualty rate that the New Zealand public would appear to be prepared to buy. What's your thought?
Yeah, that's a pretty good reflection. I mean, that's really what they're saying, is that we're not prepared to put up with the level of lawlessness that we're witnessing, and if that comes with consequences, we're willing to pay them. The problem is that's fine till you're the whānau that's paying those consequences. But you also need to factor in that these people are driving this way anyway, and they're already putting people at risk. They're already having accidents. So it's not like it's a zero-sum sort of argument. But it's certainly an argument that I can understand. And look, I have very mixed views on it as well. I see the damage done to our members when they're involved in an incident where someone's killed or seriously injured, and that can have a lifelong effect on them as well.
How you see that is ironic, because on the Saturday morning at 1:30 a.m, before this policy was announced, this just Saturday just gone, Chris, there was that casualty of a 20-year-old killing himself and seriously injuring two of his partners, running from the police, having burgled a liquor store in Dunedin. You might have caught up with that. So obviously people are still dying, running from the police anyhow, whether the police are pursuing or not.
That's right, and that would be the argument a lot of my police officers would say, is that it's increased the level of dangerous driving, the stolen vehicles, and the youths taking risks has increased dramatically, and that 106% increase in people fleeing certainly shows that something hasn't worked in this policy and there needs to be some adjustment. But I've always said you'll never get a perfect fleeing driver policy. I've looked all around the world and there isn't one.
Yeah, that's fair enough, and I think that's accepted. All right, but why did Police Commissioner Costa do the U-turn though? Because it is a U-turn, and it's 100% U-turn.
Yeah, well, I think he certainly got feedback from his staff that this wasn't working. I think the stats show that there's an issue, that it's certainly changed criminal behaviour, especially young offenders' behaviour. But also I think the public feedback has been pretty strong that they don't think police are taking strong enough stance around this offending. So I think those three things have influenced him.
Chris, one of the things that's difficult for people to understand, and we tend to hold politicians to account for the way in which police operate and the way in which their operating procedures are observed or not observed, and yet there is this quite clear dividing line between what the police commissioner can say, as former Minister of Police Stuart Nash found out, and what they can't. What is that line? Is Commissioner Costa essentially an independent entity in a way in which no other state services chief executive is?
Yeah, that's very much the case. The Policing Act make that very clear. There's three sort of parts. You have the Parliament, you have police, and you have the courts, and they're all separate. And that's very important in a democracy like we have. But it would be fair to say that line is a lot more blurred than it once was. I think politicians once knew their line quite clearly, and it was unfortunate perhaps what happened to Stuart Nash. It sent a very clear reminder, I think, to politicians that there is a separation that needs to remain.
And yet the politicians are elected by us. Their job is to reflect the public sentiment. If the police commissioner is immune from that kind of pressure, does that mean you get a disconnect in the way in which Molesworth Street will react to an issue compared to the public sentiment?
Look, you can, but I mean, in the end, the parliamentarians pass the laws, the police then police those laws. But I mean, as this commissioner's pretty quick to say, we police with the consent of the community, and I'd argue that then also gives you a steer what the community expect, and you could argue this policy is a response to what the community is expressing. The challenge with policing, of course, is when you have a very wide and varied community, is what part wants you to police in what way, and that can be a challenge. I mean, I'll give you an example around this. I mean, I heard the Children's Commissioner this morning saying, well, police shouldn't pursue children. They can catch them later with their fingerprints. But then we've got the Privacy Commissioner saying we can't take youth's fingerprints. So, this is the difficulty for police. They're trying to please everyone, and you can't.
And the other thing that's come out very strongly since particularly the RAM raiding epidemic broke out is the large number of youth involved in that. What I've heard New Zealand Police say at an operational level is that they can measure these young offenders probably under 200. And the suggestion is obviously that they come from significantly dysfunctional families. Is there really a problem there, and does that frustrate you and your frontline police personnel?
Yeah, no, it certainly does. There's definitely relatively small numbers commit the vast majority of these sorts of offences. And when police see a revolving door of the same offenders getting caught, getting released, they're out again the next night doing it. Even when some of them are put into Oranga Tamariki custody, it's not secure custody, so they literally walk out the back door, and some of them are released quicker than police have finished the paperwork. So that is incredibly frustrating, and it's difficult. I mean, we do know, the history will tell us, that locking these kids up in boys' homes just created gang members in the future. So it's somehow trying to deal with those really hardened youth that are the repetitive offenders. But it is frustrating to police to deal with the same ones night after night.
But that's not your job, is it? Your job is not to rehabilitate or to restore. Your job is to catch and then hand over to the Justice Department to punish. Is that right? Have I got that wrong?
Yeah, no, I agree, and a lot of the time police have now worked into what you might say more the follow-up and the looking after these youths, and that's one of the challenges we have, is that police start taking on responsibilities that they're not equipped or certainly resourced and staffed for, and very much, I think, OT have to step up and say, what are we going to do to deal with this offending? Because you're right, police are doing their job capturing them, but it's not flowing on to results for the change in their behaviour.
Chris, the other thing that I've just come from Wellington, so I spent the weekend at Wellington at the platform's first birthday party, and I went down into the Courtenay Place area around there as well, saw some of inner city Wellington, a Wellington I haven't seen for a long time, or have never seen actually until now. You've got a lot of mentally ill people on the streets, and I'm sure that's true of Auckland as well. The last time I was there, it was bitterly apparent. You're presumably dealing with these, or your staff are dealing with this on a nightly basis, daily basis. Is this one of the reasons why you have so many disaffected staff?
Yeah, very much so. Mental health, people suffering from mental distress, just sucks up so much police time. And again, it's an argument that this isn't actually what police should be doing. They're not trained for it. They're not resourced for it. I mean, you would have seen possibly that the Metropolitan Police Commissioner in London has just announced that from the 31st of August, police won't be attending mental health call-outs. They say it's a health problem and they should be the first responders. Big call, but I can understand why they're doing it. I mean, there's so much issues with mental health, but some of those people you see on the street, to me, they've just been abandoned by the system.
Yeah.
They really have.
Yeah.
They've just been left, honestly, on the street as though no one cares for them.
Yeah. No, listen, that's my view too. So we talk about a caring society, but you look at those people and you're going, well, nobody gives a rat's ass about them. All right. Now, the other thing is, you've also recruited, and I'm fascinated on the police numbers issue here. The government say that they have recruited record numbers of police. I think they've used 1,800 as a particular number, recruited additional police. But is that 1,800 in actual fact finding its way in addition to police staff, or is that just replacing those who are going?
No, it is additional. We totally accept that, and we'd say they've finally got there. As of a graduation later in the week, we'll say they've reached that 1,800 extra that was announced in 2017. But the challenge is, and I can tell you for when I went out and spoke to the troops, 17, 18, they really noticed that difference. Unfortunately, that was a 20% increase in staffing. The reality is we've been swamped with demand. So family harm up 60%, mental health call-outs up 60%, doubling of gang members, all these things, the ram raids, they've just sucked up the demand. So that 20% increase in staff really doesn't feel like it's made any difference anymore. And that's why the public aren't seeing appreciable changes.
Yeah, that's frightening. I mean, 1,800 is a hell of a lot of additional staff to have on your front line. If they're not being able to meet demand, that gives you some indication what crime's doing. And just on that family harm issue, you're talking about what? Called to people's houses because there's some sort of assault or dispute going on. Is that right?
Well, that's right. And that's another area that's got to be looked at, because a lot of them, again, aren't criminal offending. So certainly no issue. Police should be going to homes where someone's been assaulted or they're being threatened or they're at risk. A lot of the time we're going because there's parenting issues. And I use the phrase, it's parenting, not policing. And police need to triage that a lot better. I get figures quoted to me as high as 65% of what we call family harm incidents that we attend involve no criminal offending. And like this is where police start taking on roles that actually they just simply can't deliver, and that means you're not seeing them on the street. Look, I was at a police conference in Queensland last week. I went over there to understand what they're going to do about recruiting Kiwi cops, and that's a bit of a concern to me. But they've had a big inquiry into the police response to domestic violence, and it's exactly the same problem. Police are having to go to absolutely everything and then held responsible when it goes wrong, when so often it's actually a parenting issue.
So just take me one through that. If you're saying that 65% of what's classified as family harm incidents are actually not criminal issues, are we talking what? Are we talking parents falling out with adolescent children and having arguments and, somebody's throwing something? Or are we talking two people having a go at each other with loud voices? What are we talking about?
Well, certainly a lot of that adolescent arguments is a big part of what police do. Someone won't go to bed, someone won't turn off the computer, someone's not sharing with their brother. Absolutely ridiculous for police to be involved in those situations.
How do the police get called to those?
They get called to everything these days. This is the thing, we're the only 24/7 agency out there. And, once you start saying you're going to go to things, then the demand just keeps growing. As I say, you can have the same argument about why police are called when someone's suffering from mental distress, but they're not violent and they're not threatening anyone. Why would you send a policeman and not a health professional? Because there are no health professionals to go. So, that's the challenge for police. We keep doing stuff that we're not resourced or staffed for.
Fair enough. And finally, you've just mentioned that, you would be aware that about this time last year, and for some time, both nurses and teachers have been actively recruited by Australian states, by the federal authorities as well, and over there, with the promise of better salaries, better conditions, and now you're talking about police might be added to that list as well. Is there a move, do you think? Are you anticipating one of experienced police staff moving across the Tasman?
Yeah, I think it's a real risk. Look, we've seen advertisements, Western Australia, Northern Territories, and we know we've had a trickle, and that's all I'd call it. I wouldn't over-exaggerate. But Queensland are going to be very active in this space. So they're going to offer a $20,000 incentive package to move there. They're offering significant increase in salaries from what you earn here, along with the ability to get paid overtime. With police in New Zealand don't have paid overtime. So I think they're going to be a significant risk for us, and they want the 5 to 10 year constables, the ones that are the future of our policing, that we've just got up to a really strong level. So I think we're going to have to be very much aware of that threat.
And finally, heading into the election, I imagine that the Police Association will have an agenda. I guess you're paid to have an agenda almost in this respect. You'll be petitioning. What were the top 2 or 3 things at the top of the agenda? Are the issues that we've discussed this morning or this afternoon?
They are a lot of the issues we've discussed. I mean, the government really needs to deal with the demand side of things. As you said, they've given us 1,800 extra, and we're not noticing the difference because that demand continues to increase. So we want to see that. We want to, though, the government's made a commitment of 1 to 480 police officers. We're currently at about 1 to 490. We probably need that to go down anyway, so we'd like to see that increase. But I think the threat of these Australians, one of the things that's driving that is we've got a very old-fashioned remuneration system, and we'd like to see a commitment around some changes. And that's not necessarily asking for more pay, it's asking for it to be delivered in a much better way, that we see staff rewarded earlier in their careers to keep them here.
Okay. Chris, thank you for joining us. I wish you well over the next 4 or 5 months. Hope you get what you need to.
Thanks very much, Michael.
Good on you. Thank you. All right, that's Chris Cahill, President of the New Zealand Police Association.